Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. If you're the kind of person who loves cutting through the noise to get straight to the raw mechanics of history, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're breaking down an absolutely wild true story, the 1972 escape of Indian fighter pilots from Pakistan's supposedly impenetrable Rawalpindi Jail. So, let's jump in. I want you to picture the climax right up front. It's August 13th, 1972. Outside cell number 4 of Rawalpindi Jail, the monsoon rains are just hammering down, right? Creating this deafening roar that perfectly masks the sound of scraping brick. Inside, there's this tense, heavy silence. 3 men with 0 actual weapons or lockpicking tools are about to literally slide right through a high-security wall, slipping right under the noses of armed guards. But the absolute most chilling detail here, a 4th man is staying behind in that cell, knowing exactly the hell that awaits him in the morning. To figure out how they got to this impossible moment, we've got to rewind.
Part 1. The Capture and Interrogation.
So how does a highly trained Indian fighter pilot, Dilip Parlukar, end up in that inescapable cell in the first place? It all starts in the freezing winter of December 1971, and man, things escalated fast. On December 3rd, Pakistan launches Operation Chengiz Khan, bombing key Indian airfields and officially triggering a full-scale 13-day war. Literally a week later, December 10th, Parlukar is sent on a massive mission to wipe out an advanced radar station near Lahore. He successfully destroys the target, but then, boom, his Sukhoi aircraft takes a direct hit from anti-aircraft fire. The controls fail, the cockpit fills with smoke, and he's forced to eject. He parachutes right down into enemy territory, gets surrounded by an angry mob, and is ultimately taken into custody by the Pakistani military. 6 days later, the war is officially over. But for Parlukar, his war was just shifting forms. Part 2. Psychological War in Rawalpindi.
You see, the physical capture of these pilots was really just the beginning. The actual immediate battle? That was a brutal psychological one, happening inside the interrogation rooms of a POW camp in Rawalpindi. Pakistani intelligence was desperate to get their hands on the internal layout of the Adhampur Air Base in Punjab, which was a huge hub for Indian air ops. They hand Parlukar a pen and paper, basically giving him an ultimatum: draw the base. A single slip-up here could mean death. Instead, Parlukar stays completely cool. He draws this incredibly detailed, precise map. The intelligence officers are absolutely thrilled, completely oblivious to the fact that Parlukar had just drawn the layout from Mumbai's Santa Cruz civilian airport. And this brilliantly illustrates the kind of high-stakes mind games these guys were playing. Alongside 11 other captive pilots, they spent weeks feeding interrogators totally bogus radar frequencies and fake weapon locations. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth risk this? The war ended on December 16th. Under the Geneva Convention, these guys were slated for release, but Parlukar understood the harsh reality of diplomacy. Peace talks and paperwork between hostile nations can drag on for months, sometimes even years. His fighter pilot training had hardwired a very specific philosophy into him. Never sit idle in captivity. Try every possible way to steal your freedom. For him, relying on diplomatic promises just felt like gambling with his life. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. Part 3. Spoons, scissors, and stone. Okay, there is a stark contrast between the impregnable, fortified walls of Rawalpindi Jail and the absolutely mundane, everyday items these pilots used to actually break out. The step-by-step breakdown here is just fascinating because it requires an almost superhuman level of patience. Step 1. Parlukar and his accomplices, MS Gurwal and Harris Singhi, managed to manipulate the prison admin into moving them to cell number 4. Why? Because it's the largest cell closest to the outer wall. Step 2. They need tools. So they intentionally grow out their beards for the sole purpose of formally requesting a small pair of scissors for trimming. Step 3. They start slowly pocketing steel spoons during their meals. And that's the whole toolkit. A pair of scissors and some spoons going up against solid brick and plaster. Now, what's truly mind-blowing here is how they covered their tracks over the coming months. It took incredible discipline. They scraped at the wall only at night in total darkness while others pressed their ears to the door listening for guards. And before the sun even came up, they had to perfectly put the loosened bricks back in place so morning roll call wouldn't notice a single scratch. What about the debris, right? Well, they actually hid the scraped mortar at the bottom of empty cardboard care packages sent from their families in India, piling fake trash on top of the rubble. But the absolute masterstroke was the map. Parlukar casually strikes up a chat with the camp commandant, Usman Hamid, and casually mentions he wants to plan a road trip to the 1972 Munich Olympics once he's released.
Using this completely innocent disguise, he actually convinced the commandant to lend him an international map, which just so happened to show the exact route from Pakistan straight to the Afghan border.
Part 4. Fleeing toward the Afghan border.
So, having mapped out an escape route to Afghanistan, where Pakistani authorities would have zero jurisdiction, they really just needed the right weather and the perfect distraction, and mid-August delivered both. But remember earlier I mentioned a fourth man stayed behind? This brings us to the heartbreaking but deeply heroic sacrifice of pilot V.S. Chatre. He knew that if all four of them escaped, the guards would find an entirely empty cell at the 6 a.m. roll call, and that would trigger an immediate nationwide red alert. To buy his friends maximum time, Chatre chose to stay behind in that hell. He stuffed pillows under the blankets of the other 3 beds so it looked like they were fast asleep. He did all this fully knowing that when the guards finally realized they'd been tricked, the entire brunt of their wrath and torture would fall squarely on him alone. Thanks to Chatre's incredible sacrifice, the ticking clock starts. On the night of August 13th, under the heavy cover of rain, and perfectly timing it so guards were on leave for Pakistan's Independence Day on the 14th, the 3 men slide through the hole in the wall. They quickly change into Patani suits and adopt completely new aliases. Parlapur becomes Philip Peter, Gruwal becomes Ali Amir, and Sinjid becomes John Jacob. And they move flawlessly. They catch a train to Peshawar the next morning, grab a bus to Landi Kotal by the afternoon, and by that evening, they are just mere kilometers away from the Torkham border and complete freedom. Part 5. Caught by a map error. Right on the very edge of victory, I mean literally within walking distance of the Afghan border, the entire operation just unravels. And it wasn't because they got spotted by a guard or hit a security checkpoint. No, it was a fatal flaw in the very map they had staked their lives on. According to the commandant's map, their navigation point was the Landi Khana railway station. But when they arrived in the area, they couldn't find it anywhere. Why? Because the map was a relic from the British era, and that specific railway station had been permanently closed back in 1932. Completely lost and out of options, they were forced to ask a local taxi driver for a ride to the border. And that taxi ride blew their cover completely. Their broken Urdu and out-of-place accents raised immediate red flags. The local Khyber police show up, detain them, and during a search, find their English ID cards. Now, this is easily the most dangerous moment of their entire journey. They're out in a tribal area. If the gathering local mob realizes that these are the very Indian pilots who had been bombing their country, they are going to be executed right there on the street, no questions asked. Facing literal death, Parlokar plays one final, brilliant psychological bluff. He confidently demands that the police call Commandant Usman Hamid in Rawalpindi. Hamid, realizing the massive international disaster it would be if POWs were murdered in the streets by a mob, immediately dispatches heavily armed military to securely transport them back to jail. Parlokar's quick thinking literally saved their lives. Yes, they were thrown into solitary confinement, but they survived, and they were eventually repatriated months later in December 1972. Part 6. The Truth About the 54. Sitting safely at home today, it's pretty easy for us to ask, why on earth did they take such an insane risk? I mean, they were legally going to be released anyway, right? Why risk facing a firing squad? Well, to answer that, we have to look at some pretty grim historical data. History widely records that following the 1971 war, India securely returned 93,000 surrendered Pakistani soldiers. It was the largest military surrender since World War II, and international protocols were followed by the book. But the crucial point is this contrasting number, 54. Officially, there were 54 Indian soldiers categorized as missing in action who never, ever returned home after the 1971 war. The historical records present a really chilling reality that completely validates Parlokar's worst fears. Now, Pakistan has historically denied holding these prisoners, but the evidence points elsewhere. Time magazine actually published a photograph showing Major A.K. Ghosh clearly in Pakistani custody. Flight Lieutenant V.V. Tambe was reportedly spotted by his own uncle behind bars in a Faisalabad jail as late as 1989. And in 1979, BBC journalist Victoria Schofield reported on a specific ward where around 50 Indian POWs had been kept for so long they had literally lost their minds from the torture. Parlokar knew, he just knew, that if he trusted the system blindly, he might just vanish into this exact statistical void. And that leaves us with a profound thought to wrap up today's explainer. When the systems of diplomacy are opaque, and the margins of history are filled with those who simply waited to be saved, what would you do? Would you sit in cell number 4 and wait for a promised diplomatic rescue? Or would you pick up a steel spoon, risk a firing squad, and scrape your way toward your own freedom?
It's a question that really echoes long after the story ends. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the facts, and I will see you in the next explainer.